I just graduated from college at the age of 22, and all of a sudden, I had $120,000 in debt. The most troubling aspect is that my parents' love for my twin sister Nicole is obviously biased. I wanted to pursue a legal education after high school. My parents advised me to utilize school loans to assure payments since they were dubious if I would be able to obtain a scholarship, even though I desired one. I was still under 18 at the time, and I understood very little about loans. I took my parents' advice and applied for a loan because I trusted them. My parents completed the majority of the application papers, and I signed it as directed, but with insufficient details. I discovered that I had been partially given a scholarship when I later received the results of my scholarship application. My parents told me that the scholarship would pay half of the tuition and that they would pay the remaining amount when I asked about the specifics of the scholarship. Even though the scholarship cut my tuition in half, I began to have my reservations. The needed loan amount was just half of the tuition, because the institution covered the cost of food and housing in addition to offering quarterly scholarships. Other methods were used to cover the remaining costs. I worked part-time at a cafe to support myself, and for the previous 4 years, I never once discussed this subject with my family. Nicole chose to pursue a career in modeling, despite my parents' wishes for her to go law school or find a more secure employment. After graduating, I decided to obtain job experience rather than seek more degrees. I started an internship at a legal firm. The bank then sent me a notice to repay a $120,000 debt. I found that the tuition costs for the semesters I attended, even with interest, came to less than $60,000 when I viewed the enormous invoice via email. The stated sum, however, was double that. I called them right after to get clarity because the total, including the money my parents donated from my dorm expenses, didn't even come close to $70,000. They said that the entire tuition cost of $120,000 was taken out as a precaution in case the scholarship was not given. Confused by this, I reminded them that the scholarship had paid half of the tuition amount. Even though the scholarship was meant to cover costs like food and housing, I started to have my doubts when the bank removed the whole tuition money. Despite my parents' justifications, I was able to spot their falsehoods right away. I went to see them last weekend after deciding that the problem couldn't be handled over the phone. They initially attempted to divert the conversation, but when I repeatedly pressed them for an answer, they finally came clean. Following many conversations, they acknowledged that the remaining sum was used to cover Nicole's tuition. When I found out, I became enraged and accused them of always helping her, pointing out that their overprotectiveness was hurting her chances for the future. My mother retaliated by defending herself. They claimed to love both of their kids just as much. They first stated that they had no intention of giving Nicole a portion of my tuition, but once I was awarded a portion of the scholarship, they finally agreed to give her half of it. I questioned them about why they hadn't thought about getting Nicole a separate loan. They clarified that they had no other assets to offer because they had already used their house as collateral for my tuition, and Nicole's high school grades were insufficient for an independent loan application. I stated that Nicole and my parents should split the remaining $50,000, with me contributing only $70,000. By the next morning, while I was alone in my room before he left, my father knocked on the door and said he needed to have a serious conversation. But that wasn't the discussion I was hoping for. The subject of the loan was raised once more. My father clarified that he believed it was his duty as a parent to ensure the futures of both of his children. I felt compelled to inquire as to why he had made such a significant financial commitment to Nicole. He clarified that although he had made every effort to secure Nicole's admission to college, she ultimately decided to pursue a career in modeling. I sarcastically inquired as to whether Nicole had accomplished anything significant in the previous 4 years. My father gave a negative response, but he also said he couldn't stop her from trying. I hated my harsh tone, but felt it was too late to take it back. I informed him that $120,000 was simply too much for me to handle. My father countered that loan payback is reasonable because I am now making a respectable wage at my job and my income is anticipated to rise as I move into a full-time career in a few months. I retorted that, unlike Nicole, I have a secure job path ahead of me, even if I am just 22 and may need 5 years to pay back the debt in full. I asked myself why I had to take on my sister's financial burden while her future was still up in the air. I was given a lecture once more on how women need to study a lot in order to be excellent moms and wives in the future. I listened with nothing but annoyance, since I couldn't agree with it at all. In the end, I'm not sure if I really have to pay the $50,000 on my sister's behalf, if it's really my responsibility, or if I'm just being asked to do it because I have a job. I spoke with other friends about it, and they suggested that I should pay as well if Nicole was. However, that was not the case. Additionally, my college classmates agreed that I should not be responsible for covering the entire cost. At the very least, they believed Nicole should contribute some amount. It is worth noting here that educational loans cannot be transferred to others. However, with personal loans, such a transfer is possible. Typically, educational loans are directly deposited into the university's account, but a portion is also sent to the student's account to cover expenses like meals, lodging, and textbooks. Since certain subsidies were allocated to educational facilities, most of the remaining living expenditures were met by part-time work. My parents prudently took the remaining $50,000 out of my personal account and gave it to Nicole as a consequence. This was possible because my parents had access to my account. At the time, I was 18 years old and barely understood the details of banking. In hindsight, it might have been due to my lack of experience. Looking back, I feel that my ignorance of these matters was a mistake, but this is the information I can share with you now. Later, through online research and further questioning of my parents, I uncovered several facts. You may be shocked to hear how my parents actually went about taking the money out. It turned out that my parents had taken the money out and spent it on something. In no case, though, did the accusations ever really amount to $50,000. What specifically did they do to achieve that? To their amazement, they had made fictitious invoices. Although that was untrue, my parents acknowledged that they had no other option. There were other options available to them, and withdrawing my funds was not the only solution. Several times, I fiercely pondered leaving the house, but I immediately understood that it was not the prudent thing to do. The reason was that the person who needed resolution wasn't my parents, but myself. The loan is in my name, therefore it is my credit that would be impacted by this issue, not theirs. If I were to default, the burden would lie wholly on me. Thus, I plainly conveyed to them that they needed to be prepared to pay the $50,000 in case Nicole couldn't return the loan. Being their only daughter, my mother stressed that it was my responsibility to look for my sister and the family. She berated me for not helping out and gave instances of other family members who had purchased homes and vehicles for their parents. Does having their only daughter imply Nicole isn't their daughter? Their reasoning lacked logic, which frustrated me. In addition, I had excluded Nicole entirely from this conversation, but my parents firmly believed that she should not be included due to the stress she was under. They asserted that the strains of her existing circumstances and job were the cause of her mental instability. In response to my mother's claim that Nicole was completely incapable of managing stress, I pointed to her social media profile, where she frequently shared images of herself having fun with friends, appearing unaffected. My parents countered that in order for her to become a celebrity in the future, she had to seem content on social media. This argument was completely ridiculous. In the end, I made the decision to discuss the money matter with Nicole personally. I thought it was time to cease being so overly careful with her. I waited until after midnight that night for her to get home, as she normally did. My parents had fallen asleep by the time she got back. I thought this was the ideal chance. To make it look like a coincidence, I claimed to be eating ice cream informally when I heard her car pull up in front of our house. I gave her a piece of ice cream when she entered. To put her at ease, I then began discussing subjects she would find fascinating, such as anecdotes about our neighbors or cousins. I also mentioned the most recent rumors regarding her school pals. I didn't feel the need to be formal or stiff, since I was her sister. But we had not been really close since our parents had spoiled her. I didn't like her at first. I questioned her about her employment circumstances during the chat. I inquired about any classes she had taken or abilities she had acquired to follow her dreams, because based on her response, it didn't appear that she was having any serious problems at work. "No," she said simply. I then inquired about her using the money our parents had given her. After a brief pause, she said, "What money?" I clarified that I was talking about the student debt of $50,000. "Do you know what she used that money for?" It wasn't for lip improvements, cosmetic surgery, or anything like. She had completely squandered the funds on trips and parties with her pals. There were far more worthwhile things she might have done with it. Up until that point, I had been able to maintain my composure, but now I was totally out of it. I couldn't contain my rage and couldn't see why she would waste so much money on pointless events. She said defensively, "I have nothing to do with this. It's obviously unimportant. You want me to pay back the money I spent on smoking with my pals?" We got into a fierce disagreement till our parents awoke and broke up the fight. They reprimanded me, asking things like, "Why would you say such things?" and "Why are you pressuring her so much?" They made me out to be the evil one, and when I inquired why they continued to indulge her, they answered, "It's about the money." But the actual problem wasn't the money itself. It was that she had squandered it foolishly and exhibited no remorse. I couldn't say anything this time, although normally I would have. My parents tried to reassure me when I inquired whether they knew about this, saying, "Let's talk about this calmly in the morning." But I adamantly demanded that the issue be settled right away and made it clear that I would not reimburse Nicole for her lavish spending. Nicole provocatively said, "It's sufficient as long as the tuition is paid. I'm in charge of the rest." "The legal responsibility doesn't fall on me because the loan is in your name," she added. She was correct, in a sense. I felt completely defeated at that point and knew I had had enough of them. I explained to my parents that such costs had to be covered by either Nicole or them. After that, I hurried out of the house and spent the night at a friend's house from college. I went back to my dorm the following morning without talking to anyone. Thankfully, the guidance I had obtained from the bank officer I initially contacted turned out to be really beneficial. He was really helpful and gave a thorough explanation of the loan procedure. I spoke with the bank officer after the heated argument with Nicole and my parents, and he assisted me in discovering that the loan amount had been fraudulently taken out and the invoices had been fabricated. He told me that I might be able to sue my parents as a result, but before I could continue, I had to collect all of the original invoices. Since I had intended to transfer from the dormitory to an apartment following graduation, I had already started packing, and most of the invoices were missing. It would be difficult to remember them. I looked through emails and other apps for several days in order to find all of the bills. I gave my parents copies of the gathered bills a few mornings following that dispute. In a normal situation, I could have been happy with their move, but I was still furious and couldn't forgive them for ignoring me. I chose to do the one thing my parents would not want, tormenting their precious Nicole, even if I had no intention of talking to them. I forwarded Nicole passages from the law that dealt with loan fraud, explicitly stating the consequences, including fraud charges, if repayments of between $20,000 and $50,000 were not paid. I told her that I was in possession of all the original invoices and that I was not afraid to sue my own parents. Even when Nicole didn't answer, my father finally called me. He called and left a voicemail since I didn't answer. He accused me in the message of acting greedily and of not even fulfilling my bare minimum of responsibilities to my sister. Even though Nicole and I are just 2 minutes apart in age, I may have thought about paying if she had put the money towards something meaningful. Furthermore, the situation might have been better if she had expressed regret for her spending or acknowledged any fault. She did, however, appear to be pleased with her purchases. Why my parents believe they have the right to keep the money I have earned on my own is beyond me. When I shared the message I sent to Nicole to my parents, I received a reply from my mother. She accused me of being greedy, obstinate, and selfish. I instructed them to pay the appropriate amount, and I didn't care how they characterized me. My father stated he needed time to assess their financial status and would get back to me after a number of tense disputes and blame-sharing sessions. However, a week has gone by since that assurance, and I have yet to receive a response from them. I might have been a little too harsh by threatening to sue, but I had no other option. In actuality, I am unable to pay that sum. That sum is a portion of the savings I have so far prudently handled. I warned my parents once more that they would be sued for fraud unless they paid the $50,000. I haven't spoken to my folks in more than a month. Even though I had 6 months until the loan's installments were due, I had already found employment and had begun making loan payments. This is my third loan payment, and I won't be able to pay off half of it for a long time. I still have to pay the other half, though. In spite of this, I messaged my father once again to get their stance. He didn't respond, but a few days later, my parents and Nicole came up at my flat without warning. My mother began yelling at me in the hallway when I attempted to phone my father. I was accused of being shameless by her. Even though my parents raised me well and gave me a decent education, I welcomed them and Nicole inside, since I didn't want to make a commotion in the neighborhood. When they entered, Nicole joined my mother in condemning me and used a variety of derogatory language to attack me. I raged at Nicole, telling her that spending such a significant sum of money so irresponsibly was disgraceful, and forcefully urged that she should reimburse it. She protested back, insisting she hadn't asked our parents for the money. According to her, since our parents voluntarily donated money to her, she had no duty to repay it. Is such a claim reasonable in your opinion? It is obviously not. By saying they had mortgaged the house for my future, my mother attempted to exert pressure on me. When I ran out of patience, I said, "Then stop paying the loan and ask the bank to auction the house to settle the debt." They appeared to know I was serious when I said that. They left the home without saying anything further, as the persuading that had been going on up to that point came to an end. I got in touch with my father once more about a month later and reaffirmed that they still had to make the payment. He clarified that in order to lessen Nicole's financial burden and pay back the loan, he wanted to divide a portion of the property for rental usage. Although it is unfortunate that the house has been divided in order to pay back the debt, Nicole should bear the burden, in my opinion. She always accuses me of depreciating the house, but I can't stand it anymore. I am now responsible for loan payments. I spoke with the bank branch manager about the loan duration, and he said, "There's no other choice. It will take 3 years to pay it off in full, with $7,000 still owed." My parents have a grace period to collect the money at that time. If we're lucky, my parents might be able to give the money at the end of those 3 years. Over the course of these 3 years, a lot has changed. There have been major changes in my life. In addition to being engaged to my college sweetheart, I am currently employed in Canada as a corporate lawyer. Our wedding is scheduled for next year. I am really appreciative of my current achievement, as well as the fact that I have finally paid off the debt and finished the drawn-out repayment process. But the fact that my connection with my parents has gotten worse still makes me very sad. This issue is still confusing, but my father agreed to rent out half the house and use the rental revenue to pay off Nicole's loan. The payments were sent on schedule at first, but my father stopped paying me right away as he found out that I was a full-time, high-paying employee of a large corporation. Sometimes he gave excuses like renters not paying their rent on time. He also said that extra funding was needed to cover my mother's growing medical bills and company problems, which resulted in further payment delays. He has been delaying payments for the past 2.5 years, using these different justifications. I have been the sole one paying payments in the interim. I questioned my fiancé's statement that Nicole wasn't entirely dependent on our parents for financial support. When I inquired about his level of certainty, he mentioned that my mother and Nicole never passed up the chance to show off their pricey designer clothing and the newest jewelry during family get-togethers. As proof, he produced pictures of Nicole and my parents from various occasions. My parents treated me like a financial asset, which left me feeling very disappointed and mistrustful after seeing these pictures. I couldn't control my feelings, so I gave my father a last warning that I would take the proper steps if they didn't make the promised payment. I was committed to finding a quick solution to this problem. My fiancé has been my biggest pillar of support throughout this trying time. He sought the expert advice of his sister, who works as a police officer. His sister promptly got in touch with my parents and told them that if they didn't pay, I was ready to report the incident to the police. However, in order to avoid going to court, my parents sought an informal resolution because it was evident that this was a civil problem and was unlikely to be handled as a criminal case. Having to do such actions really disturbs me, but I was left with no other option. Eventually, my father grudgingly consented to pay. But my father sent me a stern letter saying he was disowning me when the loan was paid off in full. "Never contact us again," were the harsh words written in the letter. I was shocked by this unexpected event and started crying. "It's not your fault," my fiancé reassured me. "They are only vindictive and selfish." Nevertheless, having my own family abuse me in this manner was really difficult. I sobbed as I felt guilty and even thought about giving them back the money they had spent. But as I calmed down, I understood that they would never regret whatever I had done for them. I now have the fortitude to live my life without being impacted by other people's criticism.